The first sign that something was wrong arrived in the most ordinary way possible. It was a missed call. No voicemail. No follow-up text. Just my mother's name lighting up my phone while I was standing in line at a grocery store in Northern California holding a basket with 2 items I didn't really need. I saw the call, felt a small tightening in my chest, and waited. She usually called twice. When she didn't, I told myself not to read into it. That was my habit, to minimize, to soften, to assume good intentions even when the pattern suggested otherwise. I was 32 years old, financially independent, working in project management for a healthcare logistics firm, and still reacting to my family like a teenager waiting for approval. I didn't like that about myself, but I didn't know how to stop yet. By the time I got back to my apartment, there was a new email waiting for me. Subject line family update. It wasn't from my mother. It was from my older sister Denise. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter, my keys still in my hand. She wrote that there had been a change in plans for the upcoming Christmas gathering. That it was nothing personal. That it was simpler this way. That my parents had decided to host a smaller event at the house in Sonoma, just immediate family and close friends. I read it twice before the words settled. I was immediate family. At least I thought I was. I scrolled. At the bottom, she added a line that made my stomach go cold. Since you won't be coming, Dad asked if you could still handle the winery paperwork before the end of the month. The winery. I set my keys down slowly. My parents owned a small family winery on paper. In reality, I had been the one keeping it afloat for years. I handled vendor contracts, distribution licensing, tax filings, insurance renewals. I didn't live there. I wasn't listed as an owner. But every time something needed fixing, organizing, or paying attention to, my phone rang. They called it helping the family business. I called it temporary. I replied with one sentence. I wasn't told I wasn't coming. The response came quickly. Dad didn't want to make it awkward. I laughed once quietly alone in my kitchen. Awkward. That was the word they used when they didn't want to explain themselves. When a decision had already been made without me. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, the late afternoon light softened the street. People walked dogs. Someone jogged past with earbuds and unaware that something foundational was shifting inside me. I checked the shared calendar we always used for family planning. My name was gone. Not grayed out, removed. I refreshed the page, same result. That was when I felt it, not anger, not sadness. Displacement. Like I had stepped into a room I thought I belonged in and found the furniture rearranged to make it clear I was no longer accounted for. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. You got Denise's email? Yes, I replied. Good, then you understand. Understand what I asked. That this year is different. Different how I wanted to ask. Different because I had stopped sending money automatically without questions. Different because I'd asked for my name to be added to paperwork last spring and been told to wait. Instead, I said nothing. He continued. We're keeping it low-key, no stress. I'm stressed, I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. A pause. You tend to complicate things, he said. You always have. There it was. The sentence I had been hearing my whole life, dressed up in concern disguised as honesty. I looked around my apartment. Clean, quiet, paid for by me. No chaos, no emergencies, no last-minute fixes. Complicated. I've been managing the winery compliance filings, I said evenly. If I'm not family enough to be invited, I'm not involved enough to keep handling those. Silence on the line. Then his tone shifted, hardening. Don't be dramatic. I felt something click into place then. Not a decision, a realization. This wasn't about Christmas. It never was. It was about control. About access without accountability. About keeping me close enough to be useful, but far enough to be excluded when it suited them. I'll think about it, I said, and ended the call. That night I slept poorly. Not from distress, but from alertness. My mind replayed small moments I had ignored for years. The way decisions were announced, not discussed. The way my contributions were expected but never acknowledged. The way affection cooled the moment I pushed back. By morning, the missed call from my mother finally came with a voicemail. Her voice was soft, careful. Your father didn't mean it the way it sounded, she said. This is just easier for everyone. Easier. For them. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, and felt the weight of something heavy and old settle in my chest. I wasn't being excluded because I had done something wrong. I was being excluded because I had stopped being silent. That was the moment I understood the truth I had avoided for years. The love I thought I had earned wasn't love at all. It was permission. and permission could be revoked the moment I became inconvenient. I opened my laptop and pulled up the winery documents. Vendor agreements, insurance policies, licenses, all in my name, all routed through my accounts. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clear. And clarity, I was about to learn, is the most dangerous thing you can bring into a family built on quiet control. That night, I created a new folder on my desktop and named it something simple: records. I didn't know yet what I would do with them, but I knew this. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. And whatever came next, I wouldn't be begging to belong. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the stillness in my body. No tight chest, no rush of anxiety, just a clear, alert awareness that something had crossed a point of no return. I made coffee and sat at the small table by the window again, the same place where the night before I had realized I wasn't losing my family. I was losing my usefulness to them, and those two things were not the same. My phone buzzed while the coffee cooled. "Denise, Dad says you overreacted. Can we not turn this into a whole thing?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the winery's compliance portal. My username still worked, for now. The dashboard loaded slowly. Licenses pending renewal. A distribution contract up for review. A notice from the county about updated safety regulations that required acknowledgement within 10 business days. All of it routed to me. I thought about Christmas in Sonoma. The long table. The wine poured generously for guests who praised my father's hard work. The way Denise liked to sit near the center, laughing loudly, telling stories that never included my name. The way my mother hovered, smoothing everything over. I typed a reply to Denise. "I'm not making it a whole thing. I'm stepping out of something I was never part of." She didn't respond. Around mid-morning, my mother called again. This time I answered. Her voice was gentle, but there was tension beneath it, like she was reading from a script she hadn't written. "Your father's upset," she said. "He feels like you're punishing him." "I'm not punishing anyone," I replied. "I'm responding." She sighed. "This isn't the time to draw lines. It's the holidays." That sentence had kept me quiet for years. "There's never a good time," I said calmly. "That's why nothing ever changes." Silence, then softer. "You know how much the winery means to him." I almost laughed. "I know how much control means to him," I said. "That's different." She didn't argue. That alone told me she understood more than she admitted. After we hung up, I did something I had been avoiding for years. I added up the numbers. I opened my bank statements and filtered transactions related to the winery: filing fees, legal consultations, emergency repairs, vendor advances when cash flow dipped. The total made my stomach tighten, not from fear but from recognition. This wasn't help. This was financing. And I had never been asked if I wanted that role permanently. At noon, my father called again. I let it ring this time. He left a voicemail. "You're acting like a stranger," he said. "Families don't keep score." I saved the message. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Families may not keep score, but systems always do. That afternoon, I reached out to a lawyer. Not someone my family knew. Not someone connected to the winery. A quiet referral from a coworker who specialized in business disentanglement. The kind of attorney people call when they want clean exits, not courtroom drama. Her assistant scheduled me for the following afternoon. I felt no relief, just focus. By evening, Denise finally replied. "You're putting Mom in the middle." I stared at the message, then typed back. "I was always in the middle. You just didn't notice because it wasn't uncomfortable for you." The dots appeared, disappeared. No reply. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind kept revisiting moments I had brushed off as minor. The time my father told people at a tasting event that Denise handled marketing and he handled operations while I stood nearby holding the binder with all the permits. The time my mother thanked me privately for covering a shortfall but asked me not to mention it because it would embarrass your father. I had mistaken discretion for maturity. It had really been training. The next morning, a new email arrived. Subject line: access update. From the winery's internal system. My access had been downgraded. I could view documents but not edit them. I smiled once, slow and humorless. There it was. The attempt to take control back. I forwarded the email to myself and added it to the records folder. Then I closed the laptop and got dressed for my meeting. The lawyer's office was in a low building near downtown, clean and unremarkable. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, efficient. Her name was Marissa Cole. She didn't ask me why I was hurt. She asked me what I had signed. Nothing, I said. She nodded. Good. I explained the situation calmly. The winery, the money, the exclusion, the expectation that I would continue handling everything quietly. Marissa listened, taking notes. When I finished, she leaned back. You're not part of a family business, she said. You're an unpaid administrator with financial exposure. I let that settle. You can walk away, she continued. But you need to do it formally. Otherwise, they'll keep trying to pull you back in when something breaks. What happens if I stop? I asked. She met my eyes. Things will break. I thought of my father's voice. Families don't keep score. I'm okay with that, I said. Marissa outlined the steps. Written notice. Transfer of responsibilities. Documentation of past involvement. A clear cutoff date. No drama. No confrontation. Just reality. When I left her office, the sky had darkened slightly, clouds rolling in. I sat in my car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. For years, I had believed my position in my family was fixed. It wasn't. It had been conditional. And conditions can be rejected. That night, I drafted the email. Professional, neutral, unemotional. I stated that effective immediately, I would no longer manage compliance, licensing, or administrative matters for the winery. I listed what I had been handling. I attached copies of files. I suggested they appoint someone else or retain outside help. I did not apologize. I did not explain. I scheduled it to send the next morning. Before bed, my phone buzzed one last time. A text from my father. You're making a mistake. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I turned the phone face down and turned off the light. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of making a mistake. I was afraid of going back to pretending nothing was wrong. And that fear finally had teeth. The email sent at 7:45 in the morning. I watched the confirmation appear on my screen while standing in my kitchen, my coffee untouched beside me. No fireworks, no dramatic pause. Just a quiet line of text confirming that something irreversible had been set in motion. By 8:10, my phone started buzzing. First my father, then Denise, then my mother. The screen lit up again and again, like a warning light I refused to acknowledge. I let it buzz. I let it ring. I let the silence do the work I had been doing for years. At 9 o'clock, an unfamiliar number called. I answered that one. It was the winery's longtime accountant, his voice tight and confused. I just saw your email, he said. Is this accurate? Yes, I replied, effective immediately. There was a pause. Papers shuffled. But you've been handling all regulatory matters, he said. Who should I coordinate with now? That's a decision for the owners, I said evenly. Please direct all future communication to them. He hesitated. They're not going to like this. I almost smiled. I understand, I said, and ended the call. By mid-morning, my inbox was full. Denise accused me of sabotaging the family. My father wrote a long email about loyalty sacrifice and how I was embarrassing him in front of people who respected him. My mother asked if we could just talk before things got out of hand. Out of hand. The phrase made something cold and steady settle in my chest. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to Marissa. Her reply was short. Good, let them show their hand. Around noon, I received another automated message. Access revoked. This time it was complete. I was locked out of the winery systems entirely. There it was. The confirmation I hadn't realized I needed. They weren't upset because I was family. They were upset because I had removed my labor. That afternoon, I took a walk through my neighborhood to burn off the restless energy humming under my skin. The air was cool, the sky overcast, the kind of day that made everything feel muted and exposed at the same time. As I walked, memories surfaced uninvited. The time my father called me at midnight because a shipment had been delayed and he didn't know what paperwork was missing. The way Denise laughed it off later, telling people I liked being needed. The countless small moments where my competence had been reframed as eagerness, my boundaries as attitude. I had never been asked what I wanted. I had only been told what was expected. When I got back to my apartment, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from my father. I listened to it once. You think you're teaching us a lesson, he said. But you're the one burning bridges. When this falls apart, don't expect us to clean it up for you. I deleted it, because the bridge had only ever run one way. That evening, Denise showed up at my door. She didn't text first. She never did when she wanted control. I opened the door and stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she owned the place, dropping her bag on the chair, arms already crossed. What are you doing? She demanded. I sat down slowly at the table. I told you, I said, I'm stepping away. You can't just abandon everything, she snapped. You know Dad can't handle the paperwork. I looked at her calmly. Then he shouldn't have excluded the person who was handling it. Her eyes flashed. This isn't about Christmas. It is, I said. And it isn't. She scoffed. You're punishing us because you didn't get invited. I leaned forward slightly. No, I said. I stopped pretending I was included. That landed harder than she expected. She opened her mouth, then closed it. You always do this, she said finally. You act like the victim when you're just being difficult. I watched her carefully. Do you know how much money I've put into the winery, I asked? She waved a hand dismissively. You offered to help. How much, I repeated. She didn't answer. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a printed summary I had prepared that morning. I set it in front of her. She skimmed it, her expression shifting. That can't be right, she said. It is, I replied. And that doesn't include my time. She looked up at me, something like fear flickering behind her irritation. You're going to ruin him, she said quietly. I met her gaze. He did that himself, I said. I just stopped covering for it. She left shortly after slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, my mother called again. This time, she didn't try to smooth things over. He's furious, she said. He says you've humiliated him. I didn't say anything publicly, I replied. You didn't have to, she said. People are asking questions. That was the moment I understood the real panic. It wasn't about money. It was about exposure. When we hung up, I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, listening to the faint sounds of traffic outside. I felt tired but not weak, heavy but not lost. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was watching. And what I saw was a system unraveling the moment one quiet person stopped holding it together. Before bed, I opened my laptop one more time and added a new subfolder inside Records. Communications. I dropped in every email, every voicemail, every message that revealed exactly how quickly affection turned into accusation when compliance disappeared. I didn't know yet how far this would go. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever they tried next, it wouldn't be about reconciliation. It would be about regaining control. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. Control rarely leaves quietly. It tests the edges first, looking for cracks. The first test came disguised as concern. The morning after Denise stormed out of my apartment, I received an email from a number I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Just checking in." It was from a consultant the winery had hired years earlier, someone I barely remembered. He wrote that he'd heard there was some confusion around my role and wanted to make sure I was okay. The wording was careful, almost kind. I read it once, then again. This wasn't kindness, it was reconnaissance. I forwarded the email to Marissa without responding. Her reply came back quickly. They're trying to pull information without leaving fingerprints. Don't engage. I closed my inbox and went about my day, but I could feel it now. The pressure shifting. The way a system reacts when a key component refuses to cooperate. It doesn't stop immediately. It reroutes, it probes, it escalates. By afternoon, my mother texted, "Can you please just talk to him? He hasn't eaten all day." I stared at the message longer than I meant to. For years, that sentence would have worked. I would have called, apologized for things I hadn't done, taken responsibility for emotions that weren't mine. Instead, I typed back carefully, "I'm not responsible for managing his reactions." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then nothing. That evening, the winery's distributor called me directly. He sounded irritated. "We're missing compliance documentation," he said. "Your father said you've been withholding files." I took a slow breath. "I sent everything I had access to," I said evenly. "If something's missing, it's not in my possession." There was a pause. "Well, he says you're doing this to hurt him." I felt the familiar urge to defend myself rise up then fade. "I'm doing this to disengage," I said. "There's a difference." The line went quiet for a moment. "I don't want to be in the middle of this," the distributor said finally. "Neither do I replied. After I hung up, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from my father. Not emotional, not angry. Formal. He wrote that since I had chosen to withdraw support, the family would be reviewing past contributions to determine whether I owed reimbursement for losses incurred due to sudden abandonment. I laughed softly alone. Losses. The word landed with bitter irony. I forwarded the email to Marissa. Her response was immediate. "This is a bluff. He's trying to flip the narrative." "Should I respond?" I asked. "No," she replied. "Let him put it in writing if he wants to make claims. Silence protects you." Silence. I had lived most of my life using silence to protect other people. This was the first time I used it to protect myself. The next escalation came faster than I expected. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Heavy, pressed, angry. Inside was a demand letter drafted without a lawyer. Long, rambling, accusatory. He claimed I had acted in bad faith, that my involvement with the winery had always been voluntary, that I was now sabotaging the family business out of spite. I read it once, then I placed it gently in the records folder. That night, Denise posted on social media. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. She wrote about betrayal, about family members who confuse boundaries with punishment, about how success can make people forget where they came from. Friends and relatives commented with sympathy, heart emojis, supportive words. I watched it unfold with a strange detachment. This was the part of the pattern I knew well. When private pressure fails, the story goes public. I didn't respond, I didn't comment, I didn't defend myself. Instead, I documented everything. Screenshots, dates, times. By the end of the week, the winery missed a minor regulatory deadline. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to trigger a notice from the county. The notice was addressed to my father. Not me. That detail mattered more than anything else. The consequences were finally landing where they belonged. On Friday afternoon, my mother called again. Her voice was thinner now, stripped of its usual soothing tone. "He says you've ruined everything," she said quietly. "He says people are asking questions." About what I asked, about how the winery was being managed, she replied, about who was actually doing the work. I closed my eyes. There it was, the real fear. Not failure, exposure. I didn't tell anyone anything I said. "I know," she said, "but when things stop working, people notice." We sat in silence for a moment. "I don't recognize him right now," she admitted softly. "I thought about that. I didn't recognize myself for a long time either," I said. When we hung up, the apartment felt heavy but honest, like a room after furniture has been moved and dust finally settles. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted a formal disengagement notice with Marissa's guidance. Clear language, clear dates, clear boundaries. It stated that I had withdrawn all administrative, financial, and compliance involvement with the winery, that I made no claims of ownership, that I accepted no future responsibility. No emotion, no justification, just fact. I signed it digitally and scheduled it to send Monday morning to my father, Denise, the accountant, and the distributor. As I closed the laptop, I realized something quietly profound. They were no longer reacting to my feelings. They were reacting to my absence. An absence, when it exposes dependency, is the one thing control cannot survive. Whatever came next wouldn't be small. They had lost access. And people who lose access don't reach for reconciliation. They reach for leverage. Leverage arrived the following Tuesday, not in the form of another emotional message or a public accusation, but as an official-looking envelope slipped under my apartment door sometime between midnight and dawn. I noticed it when I left for work, the pale cream paper standing out against the dark mat like it had been placed deliberately to be seen. My name was printed neatly across the front. Inside was a notice from a private mediation service based in Napa County. It stated that a complaint had been filed against me regarding financial interference and abandonment of fiduciary duties connected to the family winery. It invited me to attend a voluntary mediation session to avoid further escalation. Voluntary. I read the word twice. This was my father's style. When anger didn't work, he reached for authority. When authority didn't work, he invented it. I didn't feel panic, I felt tired. At my desk later that morning, I forwarded the notice to Marissa with a short message. "They're trying something new." Her reply came back within minutes. "This is posturing. You have no fiduciary duty. You were never an officer, owner, or employee. They're hoping the format intimidates you." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Intimidation had been their most consistent tool. It just used to wear softer clothes. By lunchtime, Denise had texted, "You really should respond. This is getting serious." I typed, deleted, typed again. "What's serious," I finally wrote, "is pretending I owe something I never agreed to give." Her response was immediate. "You're acting like Dad is your enemy." I watched the message sit on the screen, then locked my phone. I wasn't acting like anything. I was reacting to facts. That afternoon, my manager asked if I had a few minutes to talk. The tone was casual, but something in her posture made me alert. We closed the door to her office and she gestured for me to sit. "I want to be clear," she said. "This isn't a problem, but I've received an inquiry." There it was. My father had gone where I knew he eventually would. She explained that someone claiming to represent a family business had called, asking whether my role at the company conflicted with outside obligations. The caller hadn't accused me of anything directly. They had just asked questions. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "He didn't identify himself?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, which is why it raised flags." I nodded. I've already disengaged from that business, I said calmly, and I have documentation. She smiled slightly. I assumed as much. I wanted you to know, not because you're in trouble, but because I don't appreciate people trying to involve us in their personal disputes. I thanked her and left her office with my jaw set. This wasn't escalation. This was retaliation. That evening, Marissa and I spoke on the phone. Her tone was sharper than usual. He crossed a line, she said. Contacting your employer is interference. At this point, we stop waiting. She outlined the next steps. A formal cease and desist letter addressing harassment and interference. Documentation of every attempt to contact third parties. A clear record that I had acted in good faith and that further actions would be considered coercive. This isn't about punishing him, she said. It's about protecting you. I agreed. The letter went out the next morning. By noon, my phone had 12 missed calls. My father left 3 voicemails. I listened to one. His voice was tight, controlled, but the cracks were there. You think lawyers make you powerful, he said. You're tearing this family apart over pride. I deleted it. Denise sent another message. Dad's furious. He says you've humiliated him. I replied with one sentence. I didn't humiliate him. I stopped covering. After that, the silence returned. But it was different now. It wasn't strategic, it was stunned. The mediation service withdrew their invitation 2 days later, citing lack of jurisdiction. The distributor stopped calling me. The consultant never followed up. Behind the scenes, the system was correcting itself. Friday afternoon, my mother called. Her voice sounded older than I remembered. He didn't think you'd push back, she said quietly. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening. He thought you'd get scared, or tired, or feel guilty enough to come back. And now I asked. She hesitated. Now he's blaming everyone. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, she added softly. I should have said something sooner. I didn't respond right away. I don't need you to fix anything, I said finally. I just need you to stop asking me to. She didn't argue. That night alone in my apartment, I reviewed everything in the records folder. Emails, letters, notices, timelines. It told a clear story, one I hadn't been able to see while I was inside it. The moment I removed my labor, my family didn't ask how I was. They asked how to force me back. That was the truth. And once you see that, there's no unseeing it. I closed the folder and shut down my laptop. The city outside was quiet, lights reflecting faintly on the glass. I felt exhausted but grounded, like someone who had finally stopped running on someone else's map. The worst had already happened. I had been excluded, displaced, painted as the problem. What came next wouldn't be about emotion. It would be about consequences. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of those either. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They arrived in pieces, small enough to dismiss individually, loud enough together to change the shape of everything. The first piece came as an email forwarded to me by Marissa early Monday morning. The subject line was neutral, regulatory notice. She had added a single line above it. This is where the pressure shifts. I opened the attachment slowly. It was a formal notice from the County Alcohol Control Board addressed to the winery's registered owners. It cited missed documentation, incomplete safety acknowledgments, and an upcoming review that would require in-person clarification. Nothing dramatic, nothing catastrophic, but it required knowledge. The kind of knowledge my father didn't have. I closed the document and stared at the wall for a moment. I wasn't happy. I wasn't smug. I felt something closer to inevitability. This was what happened when systems stopped being propped up by invisible hands. By mid-morning, my phone rang. I recognized the number and didn't answer. He left a voicemail. This one was different. No accusations, no threats. Confusion. I don't understand what they want, my father said. They're asking about filings from last year. You handled those. I need you to explain what they're talking about. I let the message sit, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. If I answered, the pattern would restart. He would ask. I would explain. He would take credit. And when things stabilized, I would be quietly erased again. So I did nothing. At work, my focus sharpened. Tasks that used to feel draining now felt contained. Finite. I realized how much mental energy I had been leaking into my family's orbit without noticing. That afternoon, my mother texted. He's really struggling. Can you at least tell him where the files are? I replied carefully. All documents were transferred with the disengagement notice. I can't advise further. There was a long pause before she answered. He says you're doing this to punish him. I stared at the message. No, I typed. I'm doing this because I don't work there. The next piece arrived 2 days later. Denise called, her voice clipped, controlled but tight underneath. The bank froze one of the accounts, she said. They're asking questions about who's authorized to move funds. That's not my issue, I replied calmly. You used to handle that, she snapped. I used to, I said. I don't anymore. She exhaled sharply. Do you know how bad this looks? I almost laughed. No, I said. I know how accurate it looks. Silence. Then quieter, you could help us fix this. There it was. The request stripped of pretense. I leaned back in my chair. What would change if I did? I asked. She didn't answer, because the answer was nothing. I ended the call and felt a wave of exhaustion pass through me. Not regret, release. That evening, I received a message from the winery's distributor CCing my father and Denise. He requested an updated point of contact for compliance matters and expressed concern about delays affecting upcoming shipments. I wasn't copied as a responsible party. I was copied as a problem. I forwarded it to Marissa and went for a walk. The air had cooled. Leaves lined the sidewalks, brittle and dry. I walked without a destination, letting my thoughts move freely for the first time in weeks. I thought about how my role in my family had never been defined by love or support, but by utility. As long as I was useful, I was included. The moment I stopped, I became inconvenient, then dangerous. At home, another voicemail waited. My father again. This time his voice shook. You're really going to let this fall apart? He asked. After everything we built, I listened to the words carefully. Everything we built. I had been there for every step, every crisis, every quiet fix. And yet the story had never included me. I didn't delete the message. I saved it. Because it revealed something important. He didn't see this as a shared loss. He saw it as a betrayal of a story he believed he owned. The next morning, Marissa called me instead of emailing. The cease and desist worked, she said. They've stopped direct contact with third parties, but this phase isn't over. What's next? I asked. Pressure from within, she replied. They'll try to use guilt, memory, fear. She paused. Stay consistent. Consistency. That was the one thing they couldn't outmaneuver. That weekend, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired. Like someone who had been holding her breath for years. I just wanted to see you, she said quietly. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit right away. She stood near the window looking out, hands clasped. He's unraveling, she said. He doesn't know how to fix this. I waited. He keeps saying you'll come back once you calm down. I turned toward her. I am calm, I said. This is me being clear. She nodded slowly. I think I always hoped you'd save us, she admitted. You were so capable, so steady. The words landed heavily. I was a child, I said gently. It was never my job. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and something in her expression shifted. I know, she said. I just didn't know how to stop him. We sat in silence for a while. When she left, she hugged me tightly, like someone saying goodbye to a version of the future she had imagined. After she was gone, I sat alone on the couch, feeling the weight of what had changed. I had lost my place in my family, but I had gained something more important: agency. They were facing consequences not because I wanted revenge, but because I had stopped absorbing the cost of their choices. And that distinction mattered, because revenge seeks satisfaction. This wasn't about satisfaction. It was about truth finally being allowed to function without interference. Whatever came next, I knew this. I wasn't going back. And they were running out of ways to pretend they didn't need what they had taken for granted. The shift from pressure to panic happened quietly. No announcements, no dramatic outbursts, just a subtle change in tone, the way people speak when they realize the ground beneath them is no longer solid. It started with an email from the county. Not to me, to my father. I only saw it because my mother forwarded it late one night with a single line above the forwarded thread. I think this is serious. The message was procedural, almost polite. A notice of review, a request for clarification, a deadline. The kind of letter that doesn't threaten outright, but doesn't ask twice either. I read it slowly, feeling something settle into place. This wasn't chaos. This was structure reasserting itself. The next morning, Denise texted. Did you talk to anyone? No, I replied. Well, someone did, she wrote. They're asking questions about how long things were handled by someone outside ownership. I set the phone down and went about my morning. Shower, coffee, a clean blouse. The ordinary rituals felt grounding, like a reminder that my life was still intact, still mine. At work, I moved through meetings with a focus I hadn't felt in years. When people asked for my input, it was because they needed it, not because they assumed it. When I said no, it didn't require justification. Around noon, my mother called again. Her voice was unsteady. They want to meet in person, she said. The county. They said it's standard, but your father's scared. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed. About what I asked. About the filings, she said. About who was actually responsible. There it was. Responsibility. For years it had been invisible, shifted, reassigned quietly to whoever could carry it without complaint. Now it was being traced. I'm not involved, I said gently. I know, she whispered. That's the problem. That afternoon, Marissa called me with an update. They retained counsel, she said. Not a good one. I almost smiled. They're trying to argue that you were acting as a de facto officer, she continued. Which is ironic, given how careful they were to never formalize your role. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means they're scrambling, she replied, and they don't have the documentation to back it up. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same ambiguity they had used to keep me out of ownership was now working against them. That evening, Denise showed up again. This time she didn't barge in. She knocked. I opened the door and studied her face. The sharpness was gone. In its place was something closer to fear. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside. She sat on the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. This is bigger than Christmas, she said quietly. I know, I replied. They're asking about you, she continued. At the winery, at the bank, at the county office. I waited. They want to know why you were doing everything without being listed, she said. Dad doesn't have an answer that sounds good. I looked at her carefully. Neither did I said. She swallowed. You could help clear this up, she said. Just explain it was informal, family. I shook my head. Family isn't a legal structure, I said. And informal doesn't mean invisible. Her eyes filled just slightly. You don't understand what this could do to him. I felt a familiar tug in my chest, the old instinct to absorb the damage to shield. Then I let it pass. I understand exactly what it's doing, I said. It's telling the truth. She stood abruptly, pacing the room. You're enjoying this, she accused. You like watching him panic. I met her gaze calmly. If I wanted revenge, I said I would be speaking. I would be posting. I would be correcting stories. I gestured to my silent phone. I'm doing none of that. She stopped pacing. Then what do you want? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I want my life back, I said finally, without being responsible for yours. She stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. You're really not coming back, she said. No, I replied. She left without another word. 2 days later, the winery suspended distribution temporarily, not publicly, just a quiet pause while administrative matters were reviewed. Neighbors noticed. Friends asked questions. The story my father had curated for years began to crack, not because anyone attacked it, but because it could no longer support its own weight. That weekend, I received an email from the winery's attorney. Brief, formal. They requested a statement clarifying my role over the past several years. Marissa read it and nodded. They want you to help them control the narrative, she said. I won't, I replied. Good, she said. We'll respond with facts only. The statement we sent was clean. Dates, tasks, scope, no commentary, no emotion. Just reality. After that, the calls stopped. Not because things were resolved, because they had shifted. The system no longer needed me. It was accounting for me. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city quiet outside my window. I thought about how many years I had spent believing that my silence was keeping things stable. It hadn't. It had just delayed the moment when consequences arrived. Now they were here. And for the first time, they weren't landing on me. That realization didn't bring joy. It brought peace. Because when you stop carrying what isn't yours, you don't collapse. You stand. And somewhere behind me, I could feel the old structure finally giving way, not with a crash, but with a slow, irreversible settling. The kind that tells you there's no rebuilding it the way it was, only moving forward without it. By the time the review became official, I was no longer emotionally involved. That surprised me. I had expected the next phase to reopen old wounds, to stir up guilt or anger or something sharp enough to cut. Instead, what I felt was distance. Not the kind that comes from avoidance, but the kind that forms when you finally see a situation clearly and realize it no longer belongs to you. The county scheduled the review for early January. Not during the holidays, not immediately, just far enough out to let the pressure simmer. I found out about it through Marissa, not my family. They're required to produce records, she told me over the phone. They're also required to explain why operational control didn't match ownership. I pictured my father at the long dining table in Sonoma, papers spread out in front of him, trying to reconstruct a system he had never truly understood. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something closer to inevitability. Systems don't care about pride, they care about documentation. The winery issued a short internal notice to distributors and partners, citing temporary administrative delays. The phrasing was vague, deliberately calm, but behind the scenes, everyone knew something was wrong. I knew because people started reaching out. Former vendors, a compliance consultant I had worked with years earlier, even a junior staffer who used to email me quietly whenever something didn't add up. They didn't accuse. They asked, and for the first time I didn't rush to reassure anyone. "I'm no longer involved," I said over and over. "You'll need to contact the owners." Some sounded relieved, others sounded uneasy. One conversation stayed with me. A woman named Lila who handled regional distribution called late one afternoon. "I always wondered how it all ran so smoothly," she said. "Your father never seemed to know the details." I listened. "When you stopped responding, things started falling through the cracks," she continued. "Not catastrophically, just enough to notice." "I'm sorry," I said instinctively. She paused. "No," she said gently, "I think this was overdue." That night I sat at my kitchen table long after dinner staring at nothing in particular. Her words echoed in my head. Overdue. I thought about how many times I had absorbed chaos before it could become visible. How often I had mistaken prevention for loyalty. I had believed that if nothing broke, everything was fine. It wasn't. Nothing had broken because I had been holding it together with my own spine. The next contact came from my mother. She didn't call. She wrote a long email. She talked about memories, about when the winery was just an idea, about how proud my father had been when things started working, about how grateful she was that I had helped more than anyone should. That line caught my attention. More than anyone should. She didn't say it accusingly. She said it like a realization. Near the end, she wrote something I hadn't expected. "I don't know if your father will ever admit what you carried, but I see it now." I read that sentence several times. Then I closed the email without replying. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered enough that I didn't want to dilute it with a response shaped by habit. Around that same time, Denise stopped messaging me. No updates, no accusations, no pleas. The silence felt different this time. Resigned. The county review began quietly. There were no public notices, no headlines, just meetings, requests, clarifications. Marissa handled everything that involved me. I didn't attend. I didn't speak. I watched from a distance as the structure my family had relied on adjusted itself without my participation. And something strange happened. The story began to change. Not publicly, internally. People stopped saying I had abandoned the winery. They started saying things like, "She used to handle that, and I don't know how they managed before." The language shifted from accusation to confusion, from blame to curiosity. That was when I understood the true power of stepping away cleanly. When you argue, you stay inside the story someone else is telling. When you disengage, the story has to account for your absence. Mid-January, my father finally emailed me directly. No C, no lawyer language, just him. The message was short. "I didn't realize how much you were doing." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I needed more, because for the first time he wasn't demanding anything. There was no apology, no accountability, but there was acknowledgement. I didn't respond, not to punish him, because acknowledgement without change is just another form of delay. That weekend, I cleaned out a closet in my apartment and found an old notebook from my 20s. It was filled with lists, tasks, deadlines, reminders I had written for myself when no one else was tracking anything. At the back on the last page, I had written a sentence I didn't remember writing. "If I stop, everything falls apart." I closed the notebook and sat on the floor for a long time. It hadn't fallen apart. It had revealed itself. That night, lying in bed, I felt something shift again. Not the sharp clarity of earlier weeks, but something quieter. Relief. Not because the situation was resolved, but because I had stopped confusing responsibility with identity. The next phase wouldn't be about escalation. It would be about aftermath. And I was ready for that. Because whatever happened next, I knew this. I had already reclaimed the most important thing, the right to exist without propping up someone else's illusion. Everything beyond that was just paperwork catching up to the truth. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No dramatic implosions, no public reckoning, just a slow, visible recalibration as the world adjusted to a reality that no longer included my quiet labor. The county review concluded in late January, not with fines or closures, but with conditions: mandatory restructuring, updated oversight, clear delineation of responsibility. The kind of outcome that doesn't end a business but changes how it operates forever. Marissa summarized it for me in a single sentence. "They can keep going," she said. but not the way they were. I understood exactly what she meant. The winery survived, the illusion did not. My father stopped contacting me after that. Not out of peace, but out of exhaustion. The kind that comes when someone finally realizes there is no shortcut back to the old arrangement. Denise resurfaced briefly, sending a message that was half apology, half self-protection. I didn't know it was that much she wrote. I thought you liked being involved. I stared at the words and felt nothing. Not anger, not vindication. Just distance. I liked being respected, I replied. I confused the two for a while. She didn't answer. At work, something unexpected happened. I was promoted. Not because I had pushed for it, but because someone finally noticed the space I now had to perform without distraction. My manager told me I seemed sharper, more decisive, less hesitant to own outcomes. I smiled and thanked her, thinking about how much energy clarity frees up when it's no longer diverted toward managing dysfunction. That night I celebrated quietly. Takeout, a glass of wine, no announcements. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. My mother and I spoke occasionally, carefully, like two people learning a new language. She didn't ask me to fix things anymore. I didn't ask her to choose sides. One evening she said something that stayed with me. I think I built my life around preventing his anger, she admitted. And I thought that was love. I let the silence hold that truth. It wasn't your fault, I said gently. But it doesn't have to be your future. She didn't respond right away. I'm not sure who I am without it, she said finally. I wasn't either, I replied, at first. By February, the winery had hired an external operations manager. Someone competent, someone paid, someone with authority. That alone told me everything. The role I had filled for years had never been invisible. It had been unpaid. I found that detail oddly comforting. It meant my work had always had value. It had just been undervalued by the people closest to me. One afternoon, I ran into a neighbor while checking my mail. We chatted briefly. Ordinary things, weather, traffic, life. As we parted, she said something simple. You seem lighter lately. I thought about it on the walk back upstairs. She was right. Not because everything was resolved, but because I wasn't carrying weight that didn't belong to me anymore. Late one night, I opened the records folder one last time. Emails, letters, notices, proof of a chapter that had already closed. I didn't delete it. I archived it. Not as a weapon, as a reminder. Of how easily love turns into leverage when boundaries are missing. Of how silence can be mistaken for consent. Of how clarity once claimed refuses to be returned. I thought about the person I had been when this started. The woman who saw a missed call and felt her stomach tighten. The woman who believed exclusion meant she had failed. She hadn't failed. She had been outgrown. And the family that needed her to stay small had mistaken her compliance for permanence. They were wrong. As February gave way to March, the last traces of the old dynamic faded. No more updates, no more requests, no more quiet expectations disguised as care. In their place was something unfamiliar. Space. I filled it slowly, intentionally, with work that challenged me, with friendships that didn't require explanation, with evenings that belonged to no one but me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. An alignment I was learning is what real power feels like when it isn't borrowed or negotiated. It's quiet. It's steady. It doesn't announce itself. It just stands. The story wasn't over yet. There was still one more shift to come. Not from them, from me. And when it arrived, it wouldn't be loud. It would be decisive. The final shift didn't come with a crisis. It came with a choice I hadn't realized I was still avoiding. In early March, Marissa called me with what she described as a housekeeping matter. Her tone was casual but deliberate. There's one loose thread, she said. It's not urgent, but it's something you should decide intentionally instead of letting it linger. I knew immediately what she meant. The winery had survived the review. My name was no longer attached to operations. My involvement had ended cleanly. But there was still one thing tying me to that chapter of my life. A personal loan. Not formalized, not notarized, just years of quiet transfers I had labeled as temporary help. Emergency support, bridge money, funds that had kept things running when cash flow dipped. I had never expected repayment. But expectation wasn't the issue anymore. Clarity was, they never asked you to forgive the debt, Marissa continued, which means it still exists whether you acknowledge it or not. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. What are my options? I asked. She listed them calmly. Write it off formally, document it as a gift, or convert it into a structured repayment agreement. None of these are about punishment, she added. They're about closure. Closure. I had spent so long fighting for fairness that I hadn't stopped to consider whether I needed completion. That night I reviewed the numbers again, not to relive them, to understand them. They represented more than money. They represented years of prioritizing stability over consent, of stepping in where I wasn't invited but was expected, of confusing responsibility with belonging. I realized then that leaving the debt unresolved kept a door cracked open, and I didn't want any doors left open. I scheduled a call with my father, the first one since everything had settled. When he answered, his voice was cautious, guarded. "What do you want?" he asked. I appreciated the honesty. "I want to resolve something," I said, cleanly. He was quiet. "The money," I continued. "I need to decide what to do with it." His breath caught. "You're not going to ask us to pay that back," he said quickly. "We can't." "I know," I replied. That surprised him. "I'm not calling to threaten you," I said. "I'm calling to tell you what I'm doing." I explained calmly that I was converting the balance into a formal, documented loan forgiveness. No repayment required, no interest, no future obligation. But I added, once it's done, it's done. No future involvement, no expectations. There was a long silence on the line. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why do this now?" I chose my words carefully. "Because I don't want to carry anything from this into the rest of my life," I said. "Not even resentment." He exhaled slowly. "You always did think ahead," he muttered. I didn't correct him. "I'll send the paperwork," I said. "You don't need to respond. It's just for the record." When I hung up, my hands were steady. That surprised me most of all. The documents were simple. A statement of forgiveness, a release of claim, no commentary, no justification. Marissa reviewed them, nodded, and sent them through certified channels. "It's done," she said. And it was. The relief that followed wasn't emotional. It was physical, like unclenching a muscle I hadn't realized was still tight. A week later, my father sent me an email. Just one sentence. "I didn't know how to stop expecting you to fix things." I read it twice, then closed it. Not because it wasn't true, because it wasn't my responsibility anymore. As spring settled in my life, took on a rhythm that felt entirely my own. Workdays that ended without mental spillover. Weekends planned without negotiation. Decisions made without anticipating someone else's reaction. I noticed how differently I spoke. More directly, less defensively. I stopped explaining myself when no explanation was required. That more than anything told me how much I had changed. One evening, while walking home, I passed a small vineyard outside the city. Rows of vines just beginning to bud. Orderly, quiet, alive. I paused longer than necessary, watching the way growth happened without force. Later that night, I wrote something down for myself. Not as a lesson, not as advice, as a record. Power doesn't announce itself when you reclaim it. It settles. I slept well that night. No dreams, no replaying conversations, just rest. The next chapter wouldn't involve them at all. It would involve what came after reclaiming yourself. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing for it. I was choosing it. By the time April arrived, my life no longer felt like a reaction. That was the clearest sign that something fundamental had shifted. For years, my days had been shaped around anticipation. What might break? Who might call? Which silence meant trouble? Even when nothing happened, my body stayed braced like a house built on a fault line. Now the quiet stayed quiet. At first, that unsettled me. I would catch myself pausing mid-task, waiting for the interruption that never came. No emergency emails, no passive requests disguised as updates, no guilt wrapped in concern. Just space. I started filling it carefully. Not with productivity, with intention. I took mornings slower. I let myself sit with coffee instead of rushing through it. I stopped checking my phone first thing, stopped scanning for messages that might change the temperature of my day. Nothing collapsed when I did that. Nothing punished me. That realization stayed with me. At work, my promotion came with new responsibilities and a different kind of visibility. People asked for my opinion and waited for it. They followed through. They respected boundaries without pushing back. One afternoon during a strategy meeting, someone asked if I could just take on an additional project temporarily. The old version of me would have nodded automatically. Instead, I asked one question: "What comes off my plate?" The room went quiet for a moment. Then my manager answered matter of fact: "That's fair, let's reassign." No drama, no resentment. I wrote that moment down later, not because it was extraordinary, but because it wasn't. That was the difference. In May, my mother invited me to lunch. Neutral ground, a small cafe halfway between our cities. She looked different when I arrived. Not younger, just less tense. like someone who had stopped apologizing with her posture. We talked about ordinary things at first: books, weather, her sister's garden. Then she said something that surprised me. "I've started seeing a counselor." I looked at her. "I didn't know how to live without managing his moods," she said quietly. "When you stepped away, it forced me to see how much I'd built my life around that." I listened, careful not to interrupt. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added. "I just wanted you to know that I see what it cost you now." The words landed gently. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "That's enough." She nodded, relief flickering across her face. "We didn't talk about my father. We didn't need to." That was another shift I noticed. I no longer needed explanations to feel grounded. I no longer needed closure in the form of agreement. Understanding was internal now. A few weeks later, Denise sent a message. Not an apology. Not an accusation. Just an update. "They hired a full-time operations director. It's expensive." I stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled. "That makes sense," I replied. She didn't respond. And that was fine. I realized then that the power dynamic had fully inverted, not through confrontation but through replacement. Everything I had once done quietly and without recognition was now being done publicly and for a price. The work had value. I had value. They just hadn't wanted to pay either. One evening in early June, I opened the old records folder again, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see how it felt now. Emails that once made my chest tighten now looked flat. Demand letters read like artifacts from another life. Even the angry messages had lost their charge. They weren't weapons anymore. They were evidence of who I had been willing to be and who I no longer was. I archived the folder and moved it off my desktop. Not deleted, just stored. Some truths don't need to be revisited to remain true. As summer approached, invitations began to return. Not from my family, but from people who had known me without conditions: old friends, new colleagues, neighbors. I said yes when I wanted to, no when I didn't, and the world kept turning either way. One night, lying in bed with the window open, listening to distant traffic and the hum of the city, I thought about how different this story might have ended if I had fought harder to be understood. If I had argued, explained, defended myself publicly, I would have stayed entangled. Instead, I had chosen something quieter: finality. That choice hadn't made me colder. It had made me precise. I didn't feel like I had won anything. I felt like I had stopped losing. And that distinction mattered. Because winning implies opposition. This was resolution. By the end of June, I noticed something else. I had stopped narrating my life in my head. No more rehearsed conversations. No more imagined justifications. No more mental notes about how things might be perceived. I was just living. That, more than any legal document or boundary letter, told me the transformation was complete. There was only one chapter left. Not about them. About what I would carry forward. And what I would never carry again. I didn't notice the moment the story truly ended. That felt appropriate. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic realization delivered in a single sentence. Just a quiet morning in late summer when I woke up, made coffee, and realized I hadn't thought about my family in days. Not with resentment, not with vigilance, not even with sadness. They had simply loosened their hold on my inner life. That was how I knew the separation was complete. I used to believe closure came from answers, apologies, admissions. Someone finally saying, "You were right." I had waited for that moment for years without realizing it kept me tethered to the very people I needed distance from. What I learned instead was simpler and harder. Closure is not something other people give you. It's something you stop asking for. In August, I signed a lease on a slightly larger apartment. Not because I needed the space, but because I wanted it. Sunlight in the mornings, a small balcony, a sense of expansion that had nothing to do with proving anything. As I unpacked boxes, I noticed how few things I carried from my old life. No documents hidden in drawers, no backup plans, no emotional emergency kits. Just objects that belonged to me. At work, I was asked to mentor a junior colleague. During our first meeting, she hesitated before saying something that sounded rehearsed. "I don't want to be difficult," she said, "but I don't think this assignment makes sense." I watched her brace for impact. "You're allowed to say that," I told her. "Let's talk about it." Her shoulders dropped in relief. That moment stayed with me, because I recognized myself in her. The version of me that learned early on that compliance felt safer than clarity. That being useful felt closer to being loved. I wished someone had told me sooner that love built on usefulness is not love. It's a transaction with emotional interest. I stayed in light contact with my mother. We spoke like two adults now, not like a caretaker and a buffer. She never asked me to step back in. I never offered. My father and I did not reconcile. That used to sound tragic to me. It doesn't anymore. Some relationships don't end with forgiveness, they end with accuracy. I saw him once unexpectedly at a community event months later. He looked older, smaller, not defeated, just ordinary. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded. I nodded back. No anger. No need to explain. That was enough. The winery continued. Different staff, different structure, different story told to different people. And for the first time, it didn't matter to me what that story was, because it no longer required my silence to survive. One evening, I sat on my balcony watching the city settle into night. The air was warm, the sounds familiar. I thought about everything that had changed since that first missed call, the one I almost ignored. If I could speak to the woman I was, then I wouldn't tell her to be braver, or stronger, or more assertive. I would tell her this: pay attention to who only loves you when you are quiet. Notice who benefits when you doubt yourself. And understand that being excluded is sometimes the clearest invitation to leave. What looks like revenge from the outside rarely feels like it on the inside. It feels like relief. It feels like sleep. It feels like waking up and realizing you are no longer negotiating for your place in your own life. I didn't take anything from my family. I stopped giving what was never mine to owe. That was the reversal. That was the power shift. And if you are listening to this, and you recognize that familiar tightening in your chest when someone's name appears on your phone, I want you to know something. You are not imagining it. You are not overreacting. And you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people comfortable. Boundaries do not destroy families, they reveal them. And choosing yourself is not abandonment, it is alignment. If this story resonated with you, if you have lived a version of it in silence, you are not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if it spoke to you. Subscribe if you want more stories about quiet revenge family drama and what happens when the power finally changes hands. Because the most lasting revenge isn't loud. It's living well without permission. And once you do, you never go back.